Marcus had served as a palace guard for 12 years. Every morning he walked through the same golden gates, past the marble statues of ancient kings, and took his position by the throne room doors. His uniform was pressed, his sword sharp, and his loyalty absolute. The kingdom of Valenhall had been his home since birth, and protecting the royal family was more than duty. It was his calling. The palace buzzed with activity on this particular spring morning. Servants hurried through corridors carrying fresh flowers for the Queen's garden party. Kitchen staff prepared delicate pastries that would soon grace silver platters. Children of noble families ran through the halls, their laughter echoing off the high ceilings. Among them was Prince Adrian, barely 8 years old, with golden hair that caught the sunlight streaming through stained glass windows. Marcus watched the young prince play with other children near the fountain in the central courtyard. The boy's tutor, Master Edmund, sat on a stone bench reading scrolls while keeping one eye on his royal charge. Everything seemed peaceful, normal, just another day in the protected world of the palace. But Marcus noticed something troubling. A man in merchant's clothing lingered near the courtyard entrance. He claimed to be waiting to speak with the head steward about silk imports, but his eyes never left the children. Marcus had learned to trust his instincts during his years of service. Something felt wrong about this stranger. The merchant was tall and lean, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. His clothes were well made but not extravagant, exactly what a successful trader might wear. He carried a leather satchel and spoke politely to anyone who approached him. Yet Marcus observed how the man's hands trembled slightly, how his eyes darted nervously around the courtyard, how he kept checking the position of the guards. As the morning progressed, Marcus discreetly questioned other guards about the merchant. Nobody had seen him arrive through the main gates. The steward's office had no appointment scheduled with any silk trader. The head of palace security, Captain Rodriguez, was attending a meeting with the king about increasing patrols along the kingdom's borders. Marcus found himself making a decision that would change everything. He chose to trust his gut feeling over official protocols. The children's laughter grew louder as they began a game of chase around the fountain. Prince Adrian ran ahead of the others, his small legs carrying him toward the merchant's location. Master Edmund called for the children to stay closer to the center of the courtyard, but young voices and excitement made his words easy to ignore. Marcus began moving closer to the merchant, his hand resting casually on his sword hilt. The man noticed the guard's approach and shifted his weight, adjusting the strap of his satchel. Their eyes met for a brief moment. In that instant, Marcus saw something that confirmed his worst fears. Cold calculation mixed with desperate determination. The merchant's hand moved toward his satchel with sudden purpose. Marcus realized with crystal clarity that whatever was inside that bag was not silk samples or trade documents. The man's eyes had fixed on Prince Adrian, who was now just steps away, laughing and oblivious to any danger. Time seemed to slow as Marcus processed the threat. The merchant's fingers found something metallic inside the satchel. The other children were scattered around the courtyard. Master Edmund was rising from his bench, finally sensing that something was amiss. Palace servants continued their daily routines, unaware of the danger developing before their eyes. Marcus had trained for scenarios like this, but training could never fully prepare someone for the split-second decisions required when protecting innocent life. His mind raced through options: call for backup, attempt to arrest the man, or act immediately to neutralize the threat. The merchant's hand was now clearly gripping a weapon inside the satchel. The choice became clear when the merchant took a step toward Prince Adrian. Marcus drew his sword in one fluid motion, the blade singing as it left its sheath. The sound caused several people in the courtyard to turn and look. The merchant's eyes widened as he realized his plan was discovered. What happened next would be debated for months afterward. The merchant's hand emerged from the satchel holding a curved dagger, its blade gleaming with a substance that made Marcus's blood run cold. Poison. The man lunged toward the young prince with the speed of someone who had planned this moment carefully. Marcus moved faster than he had ever moved in his life. His sword came up in a defensive arc, intercepting the merchant's strike just inches from Prince Adrian's chest. The clash of metal rang out across the courtyard like a church bell. The prince stumbled backward, falling onto the grass, confused and frightened but unharmed. The merchant recovered quickly from the blocked attack and spun toward Marcus with surprising skill. This was no ordinary traitor. He moved like a trained assassin. His second strike came low, aiming for Marcus's legs. The guard parried and countered with a thrust that the merchant barely avoided. Master Edmund was now shouting for additional guards, while shepherding the other children away from the fight. Servants ran in all directions, some fleeing the scene while others moved to help protect the prince. The peaceful morning had exploded into chaos and violence. Marcus pressed his attack, driving the assassin back toward the courtyard walls. The man fought desperately, knowing that capture meant certain death. His poisoned blade darted toward Marcus's throat, forcing the guard to duck and roll to avoid the strike. The assassin used the moment to glance toward Prince Adrian, who was being helped to his feet by his tutor. Seeing the killer's attention return to the child, Marcus felt a surge of protective fury. This was no ordinary criminal. This was someone who had come to murder a child, an innocent boy who had never harmed anyone. The guard's training and instincts merged with righteous anger as he prepared to end the threat permanently. The assassin seemed to recognize that his mission was failing. With a snarl of frustration, he pulled a second weapon from his belt, a throwing knife that he immediately hurled toward Prince Adrian. Marcus saw the blade spinning through the air and knew he was too far away to intercept it with his sword. Without hesitation, Marcus threw himself between the knife and the prince. The blade struck him high in the shoulder, spinning him around but not stopping his momentum. Pain flared through his body, but his focus remained absolute. Protect the child at all costs. The assassin used Marcus's momentary distraction to make one final desperate charge toward Prince Adrian. This time there would be no mercy, no hesitation, and no second chances. The guard's duty was clear, and he would fulfill it regardless of the consequences. Marcus's blade found its mark with deadly precision. The assassin's final charge ended abruptly as the guard's sword pierced through his chest. The man's eyes widened in shock and pain before the life faded from them completely. He collapsed to the stone courtyard, his poisoned dagger clattering harmlessly away from Prince Adrian's feet. The courtyard fell silent except for the sound of Marcus's heavy breathing. Blood flowed from the throwing knife still embedded in his shoulder, but adrenaline kept him standing. Prince Adrian sat on the grass where he had fallen, staring at the scene with wide, confused eyes. Master Edmund rushed forward to shield the boy from the sight of the dead assassin. Within moments, palace guards flooded into the courtyard. Captain Rodriguez had returned from his meeting, just as the commotion began. He surveyed the scene quickly, his most trusted guard wounded but standing, an assassin dead at his feet, and the young prince safe but shaken. The captain's military experience told him everything he needed to know about what had transpired. "Secure the area," Rodriguez commanded his men. "Search the body for identification and clues. Get the royal physician for Marcus immediately." He knelt beside the assassin's corpse, carefully examining the man's clothing and weapons. The poisoned dagger confirmed the seriousness of the threat that had been neutralized. Dr. Helena, the palace physician, arrived within minutes. She was a skilled healer who had served the royal family for over 20 years. Her gentle hands examined Marcus's shoulder wound while he remained standing, refusing to sit until he was certain the prince was completely safe. "The knife missed anything vital," she announced with relief. "But you need treatment immediately. That blade might have been poisoned too." Marcus finally allowed himself to be led to a stone bench where Dr. Helena could work properly. The throwing knife came out cleanly, and she quickly cleaned and bandaged the wound. King Aldrich arrived with Queen Isabella just as the physician finished her work. The royal couple's faces showed a mixture of gratitude and horror as they learned how close their son had come to death. The king approached Marcus, who immediately tried to stand and bow despite his injury. "Stay seated, my friend," King Aldrich said softly. "You have more than earned your rest." The king's voice carried the weight of a man who had just realized how vulnerable his family truly was. "Tell me exactly what happened." Marcus recounted the morning's events in detail. He described his suspicions about the merchant, the man's nervous behavior, and the split-second decision to act when he saw the weapon. The king listened intently, occasionally asking for clarification about timing or the assassin's movements. Queen Isabella held Prince Adrian close while Marcus spoke. The young boy had stopped trembling, but his usual cheerful chatter had been replaced by unusual quiet. The queen's eyes never left Marcus's face as he described throwing himself in front of the knife, meant for her son. Captain Rodriguez approached with disturbing news. Your Majesty, we found documents sewn into the assassin's clothing. This was not a random attack. Someone paid him specifically to target Prince Adrian. The captain's weathered face was grim as he handed over the papers to the king. King Aldrich's expression darkened as he read. The documents contained detailed information about the prince's daily routine, his favorite places in the palace, and specific times when security might be lighter. This had been planned carefully by someone with inside knowledge of palace operations. Double all security immediately, the king ordered. No one enters or leaves the palace without thorough inspection. I want to know who provided this information to the assassin. His voice carried the authority of a ruler whose family had been threatened. Over the following days, the investigation revealed disturbing truths. The assassin was a hired killer from a neighboring kingdom called Drakmor. Political tensions between Valenhall and Drakmor had been rising for months over trade disputes and border disagreements. Someone in Drakmor's government had apparently decided that eliminating Valenhall's heir would solve their problems. But the most shocking discovery came when investigators found the source of the inside information. Thomas Blackwood, a palace steward who had served for 15 years, had been secretly providing details about royal family routines to Drakmor agents. His gambling debts had made him vulnerable to blackmail and bribery. Marcus was present when they arrested Blackwood in his quarters. The steward's face showed shame and terror as guards found gold coins hidden beneath his bed, payment for his betrayal. He confessed immediately, claiming he never thought anyone would actually try to hurt the prince. He had convinced himself he was only providing harmless information about meal times and daily schedules. The trial was swift and decisive. Blackwood was found guilty of treason and conspiracy to commit murder. The evidence was overwhelming, and his own confession sealed his fate. King Aldrich showed no mercy to someone who had betrayed the trust placed in him and endangered an innocent child's life. Meanwhile, Marcus recovered from his wound, but found himself changed by the experience. The other guards looked at him with new respect, not just for his combat skills, but for his instincts and decisive action. He had prevented a national tragedy through quick thinking and personal sacrifice. The young prince also seemed different after the attack. He began paying more attention to the guards around him, asking questions about their duties and showing appreciation for their protection. The innocent trust of childhood had been replaced by an early understanding of the dangers that came with royal birth. Dr. Helena declared Marcus fit for duty after 2 weeks of recovery. His shoulder was stiff but functional, and the scar would serve as a permanent reminder of that morning in the courtyard. Captain Rodriguez offered him a promotion and a position training new guards, but Marcus chose to remain in his current role protecting the royal family directly. The diplomatic consequences of the assassination attempt were severe. King Aldrich demanded that Drakmor's government identify and punish whoever had ordered the attack. When they refused to cooperate, trade between the kingdoms stopped completely. Border patrols increased, and both nations began preparing for the possibility of war. Public knowledge of the attack was carefully controlled. The people of Valenhall knew there had been a security incident at the palace, but details were kept secret to avoid panic. Marcus was quietly honored in a private ceremony, attended only by the royal family and senior palace staff. Queen Isabella personally thanked Marcus during the ceremony. "You saved my child's life," she said simply. "Nothing we can do will ever repay that debt, but you will always have our gratitude and trust." The Queen's words carried deep emotion and the absolute sincerity of a mother whose worst nightmare had been prevented. The investigation also led to improved security procedures throughout the palace. Background checks became more thorough, access to sensitive information was restricted, and new protocols were established for identifying and responding to potential threats. The lessons learned from Marcus's quick thinking were incorporated into training for all palace guards. As spring turned to summer, life at the palace began to return to normal. Prince Adrian resumed his lessons and play, though always under increased security. The young boy often sought out Marcus during his duties, showing an attachment to the guard who had protected him. Their bond would prove important in the challenges that lay ahead. 3 months after the assassination attempt, tensions between Valenhall and Drakmor reached a breaking point. King Aldrich received reports that Drakmor was massing troops along their shared border. Merchant caravans brought stories of military supplies being moved at night, and young men being recruited for the army. War seemed inevitable. Marcus continued his duties with heightened vigilance. Every stranger in the palace was viewed as a potential threat. Every shadow could hide an enemy. The carefree atmosphere that once filled the royal residence had been replaced by constant alertness and careful planning for various emergency scenarios. Prince Adrian had grown quieter since the attack, but he also showed a maturity beyond his 8 years. He followed security protocols without complaint and seemed to understand the seriousness of the situation facing his kingdom. The boy often spent time with Marcus during the guards' breaks, asking questions about sword fighting and military strategy. "Marcus, why did that man want to hurt me?" the prince asked one afternoon as they walked through the palace gardens. The guard had been dreading this question but knew it would come eventually. The innocence in the child's eyes made the answer even more difficult. "Some people believe that hurting others will solve their problems," Marcus replied carefully. "They think if they remove you, it will make things easier for their kingdom. But they are wrong. Violence only creates more problems, never solutions." The prince nodded thoughtfully, processing this complex explanation. The king called a meeting of his war council that evening. Marcus was included because of his proven loyalty and sharp observational skills. The council chamber filled with the kingdom's most experienced military leaders, advisors, and intelligence officers. Maps of the border region covered the large oak table in the center of the room. General Patterson, Valenhal's top military commander, presented the latest intelligence reports. "Drakmore has positioned approximately 15,000 soldiers within striking distance of our border. They have cavalry units, archers, and siege equipment. This is not a defensive formation. They are preparing to invade." King Aldrich studied the maps intently. "What are our defensive capabilities along that border?" he asked. The general pointed to several strategic positions where Valenhal forces were concentrated. The numbers were concerning. Drakmore had a significant advantage in troop strength. "Your Majesty," Captain Rodriguez interjected, "we must also consider the possibility of additional assassination attempts during any conflict. If they are willing to target Prince Adrian during peacetime, they will certainly try again during war." His words sent a chill through the room. Marcus spoke up from his position near the door. "Perhaps we should consider relocating the royal family to the mountain fortress during any hostilities. It would be much easier to defend, and the prince would be safer." The mountain fortress was an ancient stronghold built into the cliffs north of the capital city. The suggestion sparked intense debate among the council members. Some argued that the royal family should remain in the capital to maintain morale among the people. Others believed that protecting the heir to the throne was the highest priority. The king listened to all perspectives before making his decision. "We will prepare the mountain fortress as a fallback position," King Aldrich announced. "But we will not abandon our people unless absolutely necessary. However, I want additional security measures in place here immediately." The king's voice carried the weight of difficult leadership decisions. Dr. Helena raised a concern that others had overlooked. "Your Majesty, if we do move to the mountain fortress, we must ensure adequate medical supplies and equipment. The prince's health and safety require more than just military protection." Her practical perspective added another layer to the planning process. Over the following weeks, preparations intensified throughout the kingdom. Young men reported for military training. Blacksmiths worked day and night forging weapons and armor. Farmers brought in early harvest to ensure food supplies during a potential siege. The entire nation was mobilizing for war. Marcus found his duties expanding beyond personal protection. He was assigned to train a special unit of guards specifically responsible for the royal family's safety. These men were selected for their loyalty, skill, and ability to think quickly under pressure. The training was intensive and realistic, preparing them for worst-case scenarios. During one training session, Marcus demonstrated the importance of trusting instincts. He had the guards practice identifying suspicious behavior in crowded situations. "That man saved Prince Adrian's life because he noticed something that seemed wrong," Captain Rodriguez told the trainees. "You must develop that same awareness." The prince himself began basic combat training despite his young age. Master Edmund, his tutor, protested that 8 years old was too young for sword lessons. But Queen Isabella insisted that her son needed to be able to defend himself if necessary. Marcus was chosen as the boy's instructor because of their bond and the prince's trust in him. "Hold the sword like this. Marcus showed the prince during their first lesson. The wooden practice sword was heavy in the small hands, but Adrian was determined to learn. Remember, the goal is not to hurt others, but to protect yourself and those you care about. The distinction was important for a future king to understand. News arrived that changed everything. A messenger rode hard from the border with urgent intelligence. Drakmor forces had begun moving during the night. The invasion was beginning, and advance scouts estimated the army would reach the capital within 3 days. The time for preparation had ended. King Aldrich immediately implemented the emergency plans they had developed. Non-essential palace staff were evacuated to safer locations. Military commanders took their positions with their units. The royal family prepared for the possibility of retreating to the mountain fortress if the capital's defenses failed. Marcus was given command of the Royal Protection Unit. His mission was clear: keep the prince safe at all costs. If the palace fell, he was to escort the boy to the mountain fortress using predetermined escape routes. The responsibility weighed heavily on him, but his resolve was absolute. The queen took Marcus aside before the final preparations began. "I know what I am asking of you," she said quietly. "Adrian trusts you completely, and so do we. If the worst happens, remember that his life is more important than anything else, including ours." Her words were both a command and a plea from a mother facing an uncertain future. As night fell, the first reports of battle came from the outer defenses. Drakmor forces had engaged Valenhall troops at the border fortresses. The sounds of distant combat could be heard from the palace walls. War had come to their peaceful kingdom, and everyone's courage would soon be tested. Marcus stood guard outside Prince Adrian's chambers as the boy tried to sleep. The sounds of military preparations filled the corridors, armor clanking, weapons being distributed, orders being shouted. The palace that had once been filled with laughter and music now prepared for siege and possible defeat. The guard checked his equipment one final time. His sword was sharp, his armor fitted properly, and emergency supplies were ready. Most importantly, he had mentally prepared himself for whatever sacrifices might be necessary to protect the innocent child sleeping in the room behind him. The real test of his oath and honor was about to begin. Dawn brought terrible news. The outer defenses had fallen during the night. General Patterson's forces were retreating toward the capital in organized formations, but Drakmor's superior numbers were overwhelming. Refugees from border villages streamed toward the city walls, carrying stories of burning homes and advancing enemy soldiers. King Aldrich made the decision that everyone had dreaded. "We evacuate to the mountain fortress immediately," he announced to his war council. "The capital cannot withstand a siege with their numbers. We must preserve the kingdom's leadership and regroup for a counterattack." The words tasted bitter, but survival required strategic retreat. Marcus supervised the rapid packing of essential supplies for the royal family. Clothes, documents, medicines, and basic food supplies were loaded into sturdy travel packs. Everything had to be portable. They would be traveling on horseback through mountain paths that carriages could not navigate. Prince Adrian understood the seriousness without needing detailed explanations. He helped pack his own belongings, choosing only the most important items. His favorite sword training book went into the pack, along with a small wooden horse his father had carved for him years ago. The boy's composure impressed everyone who witnessed his calm preparation. Queen Isabella struggled with the decision to leave behind centuries of family history. Ancient tapestries, precious jewels, and irreplaceable art would remain in the palace for enemy forces to potentially destroy or steal. But she focused on what truly mattered: the safety of her family and the survival of their bloodline. Dr. Helena prepared a comprehensive medical kit for the journey. The mountain fortress had basic supplies, but the trip itself posed risks. She packed medicines for fever, infection, and injuries that might occur during their escape. The responsibility for the royal family's health during this crisis weighed heavily on her shoulders. As the sun climbed higher, scouts reported that Drakmor forces were just hours from the capital. The evacuation had to begin immediately or risk being trapped in a siege. King Aldrich took one last look at the palace that had been his home for 35 years, knowing he might never see it again. The escape party consisted of 12 people: the royal family, Marcus, and 3 other guards, Dr. Helena, Master Edmund, Captain Rodriguez, and 2 guides familiar with the mountain paths. Each person rode a strong horse selected for endurance rather than speed. They would need to travel for 2 full days to reach the fortress. Marcus rode beside Prince Adrian, constantly scanning their surroundings for threats. The mountain paths were narrow and winding, providing many opportunities for ambushes. Enemy scouts might have already identified their escape routes and positioned soldiers to intercept them. Every bend in the trail could hide danger. The first day of travel passed without incident. They made good time through familiar territory, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and eat simple meals. The prince handled the long ride better than expected, showing the same determination he had displayed during sword training. His small form sat straight in the saddle despite obvious fatigue. As evening approached, they reached a predetermined camping site in a secluded valley. Captain Rodriguez posted guards while the others set up a simple camp. No fires were allowed. Smoke could be seen for miles in the clear mountain air. They ate cold food and spoke in whispers, if at all. Marcus took the first watch while the others tried to sleep. The mountain night was cold and filled with normal forest sounds that could easily mask approaching enemies. Every snapping twig or rustling leaf required investigation. His senses remained heightened as he moved silently around their small perimeter. Prince Adrian had difficulty sleeping on the hard ground despite his exhaustion. Marcus sat beside the boy during his watch period, offering quiet reassurance. "Are we cowards for running away?" the prince whispered. The question revealed the internal struggle of a child trying to understand complex adult decisions. "Sometimes the bravest thing is knowing when to retreat," Marcus replied softly. "Your father is not running from a fight. He is making sure there will still be a kingdom to fight for." Leaders must think beyond today's battle to tomorrow's victory. The explanation seemed to comfort the young boy, who finally dozed fitfully. The second day brought new challenges. Heavy clouds gathered, threatening rain that would make the trails treacherous and slow their progress significantly. Worse, the guide spotted smoke in the distance behind them. The capital was likely burning as Drakmor forces occupied the city. They pressed on despite increasing winds and the first drops of rain. The horses struggled with the slippery rocks and steep inclines. Dr. Helena treated several minor injuries from falls and scrapes as the group navigated increasingly difficult terrain. Progress slowed to a crawl in the worst sections of trail. By afternoon, Marcus noticed something that made his blood run cold. Fresh horse tracks in the mud showed that other riders had recently used this same path. The tracks were too new to be from previous travelers and too numerous to be friendly messengers. Enemy forces had somehow discovered their escape route. He quietly alerted Captain Rodriguez, who studied the tracks with growing concern. "At least 6 riders moving fast," the captain whispered. "They could be ahead of us or behind us. We need to assume we are being hunted." The implications were terrifying. They were vulnerable, on the narrow mountain trails with limited options for defense or escape. King Aldrich gathered the group for a hushed conference. Their options were limited and dangerous. They could continue on the main trail and risk a direct confrontation with superior numbers. They could take a longer, more difficult route that might avoid the hunters but could exhaust their horses. Or they could find a defensive position and prepare for battle. "We continue but stay ready for anything," the king decided. "Marcus, you and Rodriguez scout ahead while we follow at a distance. If you encounter enemies, signal us immediately. We will not let them trap us on these narrow paths." The decision balanced speed with caution, though neither seemed sufficient against their unknown pursuers. The rain intensified as they resumed travel, making visibility poor and footing treacherous. Marcus moved ahead of the main group with Captain Rodriguez, their swords ready beneath their cloaks. Every shadow could hide an enemy archer. Every sound of shifting rocks could signal an impending attack. They crested a ridge and saw their destination in the distance, the mountain fortress carved into the cliff face like an ancient guardian. The sight should have been encouraging, but Marcus noticed something wrong. No flags flew from the towers and no smoke rose from the chimneys. The fortress appeared abandoned when it should have been prepared for their arrival. Captain Rodriguez used a small telescope to study the fortress more carefully. His expression grew grave as he examined the walls and gates. "Something is very wrong," he reported quietly. "The fortress should be manned and ready. Instead, it looks deserted. This could be a trap waiting for us." The realization hit them both simultaneously. Their enemies had not just discovered the escape route, they had anticipated the destination. The mountain fortress, their carefully planned sanctuary, might already be occupied by enemy forces waiting to complete the trap. Their refuge had potentially become their tomb. Marcus looked back toward the royal family struggling up the mountain trail behind them. Prince Adrian sat bravely on his horse despite the cold rain and difficult journey. The boy trusted the adults around him to keep him safe, unaware that their carefully laid plans were crumbling around them. The guard made a decision that would define the next phase of their survival. Rather than lead the royal family into a potential trap at the fortress, they would need to find another solution. The mountains were vast and full of hidden places where a small group might hide until the political situation changed. But first, they had to deal with the immediate threat of the hunters following them through the rain-soaked mountain paths. Marcus could hear horses approaching from behind, their hoofbeats echoing off the rocky walls. The confrontation that would determine the fate of the kingdom was about to begin on a narrow mountain trail in a driving rainstorm. Marcus signaled frantically to Captain Rodriguez as the sound of approaching horses grew louder. They had perhaps minutes before the pursuers caught up to the royal family on the narrow mountain trail. The rain continued to fall heavily, making the rocks slippery and reducing visibility to just a few dozen yards in any direction. The captain made quick hand signals to communicate a desperate plan. He would take 2 guards and create a defensive position at a narrow choke point in the trail behind them. This would buy time for Marcus to find shelter for the royal family among the rocky outcroppings ahead. It was a sacrificial strategy. Rodriguez knew he might not survive the encounter. Marcus rode back to the main group and quickly explained the situation to King Aldrich. "We need to hide immediately," he said urgently. "The captain will try to delay them, but we must assume some enemies will get through." The king's face showed the strain of leadership under impossible circumstances, but he nodded his understanding. They abandoned the trail and led their horses up a steep slope toward a cluster of large boulders. The terrain was treacherous, but it offered concealment from anyone following the main path. Dr. Helena helped Prince Adrian dismount from his horse, while Queen Isabella gathered their most essential supplies from the saddlebags. The sound of battle erupted from the trail below. Shouts, clashing metal, and the screams of wounded men echoed off the mountainside. Captain Rodriguez and his guards had engaged the enemy pursuers in desperate combat. Marcus knew that brave men were dying to protect the prince, and their sacrifice could not be wasted. "Stay absolutely quiet," Marcus whispered to Prince Adrian as they crouched behind the rocks. "No matter what you hear, do not make any sound." The boy nodded solemnly, understanding that their lives depended on remaining hidden. Rain continued to fall, which would help mask any small noises they might make accidentally. The battle sounds moved closer as some enemy soldiers apparently broke through the defensive position. Marcus could hear horses climbing up the slope toward their hiding place. His hand gripped his sword hilt as he prepared to make a final stand if they were discovered. The numbers were against them, but he would not let harm come to the prince. King Aldrich drew his own sword and positioned himself between the approaching sounds and his family. Despite being a ruler rather than a warrior, he was prepared to fight and die for his wife and son. Queen Isabella held Prince Adrian close, her body shielding him from view behind the largest boulder. Through the rain and mist, Marcus saw the first enemy soldier appear among the rocks. The man was scanning the area carefully, looking for signs of their passage. He was alone, which suggested the others were searching different areas. This might be their only chance to eliminate the threat silently. Marcus moved with the stealth he had learned during years of palace guard training. The rain covered the sound of his approach as he crept closer to the enemy soldier. The man was focused on examining horse tracks in the mud, unaware that death was approaching from behind. The guard's blade found its target before the soldier could cry out for help. Marcus caught the body and lowered it silently to the ground behind a large rock. One enemy was eliminated, but others were certainly nearby. The sounds of searching continued from multiple directions around their hiding place. A shout from below indicated that more enemy soldiers had found Captain Rodriguez's position. The captain was either dead or captured, and the remaining pursuers would now focus entirely on finding the royal family. Marcus estimated they were facing at least 4 more enemies, possibly more. Prince Adrian watched everything with wide eyes, but remained completely silent. The 8-year-old boy was witnessing violence and death that no child should see, but he understood that speaking or moving could doom them all. His maturity in this crisis was remarkable and heartbreaking. The rain began to lessen, which reduced their concealment but also improved visibility. Marcus could now see two more enemy soldiers moving methodically through the rocky area. They were professional hunters, checking every possible hiding place with military precision. Discovery seemed inevitable. One soldier climbed directly toward their boulder cluster. Marcus prepared to attack, but King Aldrich gestured for him to wait. The king had noticed something that the guard had missed. The soldier was moving predictably, following an obvious search pattern. They could use this to their advantage. As the enemy soldier climbed past their position, King Aldrich struck from the side with surprising skill. His blade pierced the man's chest before he could raise an alarm. The ruler was breathing heavily from the exertion and stress, but his eyes showed grim determination to protect his family. Two enemies remained somewhere among the rocks, but their exact positions were unknown. Marcus made a difficult decision. He would draw them away from the royal family by making himself visible. It was a dangerous gamble, but it offered the best chance of keeping the prince safe. He emerged from behind the rocks and began moving down the slope, deliberately making noise to attract attention. The strategy worked immediately. Shouts came from two different directions as the remaining enemies spotted their target and began pursuit. Marcus ran toward a different cluster of rocks, leading the threat away from Prince Adrian. The chase through the slippery rocks was treacherous. Marcus used his knowledge of mountain terrain to maintain distance from his pursuers, while leading them further from the royal family. Behind him, he could hear the enemy soldiers calling to each other as they coordinated their hunt. One pursuer got close enough to throw a spear that narrowly missed Marcus's head. The guard reached a small cliff and realized he was trapped. Below was a dangerous drop. Behind him were armed enemies, and to either side were steep rock walls. He would have to make his stand in this confined space. The first enemy soldier appeared around the rocks, sword drawn and breathing heavily from the chase. Marcus recognized him as a professional warrior from his stance and equipment. This would not be an easy fight, especially with a second enemy approaching from another direction. Marcus attacked first, using the narrow space to prevent both enemies from engaging him simultaneously. His blade crashed against his opponent's sword in a shower of sparks. The enemy was skilled, but Marcus fought with the desperation of someone protecting innocent lives. The second enemy arrived and tried to flank Marcus from the left. The guard was forced to give ground toward the cliff edge to avoid being surrounded. One wrong step would send him tumbling to his death on the rocks below. But he had no choice but to continue fighting. His opponent pressed the advantage, driving Marcus closer to the precipice with aggressive attacks. The guard's heel touched the edge of the cliff as he parried a vicious thrust aimed at his heart. He could feel loose stones falling away behind him into the void. In that desperate moment, Marcus heard something that changed everything. Prince Adrian's voice calling out from above. "Marcus, duck!" the boy shouted. The guard dropped immediately as a large rock sailed over his head and struck one of his attackers squarely in the chest. King Aldrich appeared at the top of the rocks above the cliff, having climbed up to help his loyal guard. The king threw another stone that distracted the remaining enemy long enough for Marcus to regain his footing and launch a counterattack. The tide of the battle shifted in that instant. Marcus's blade found its mark, and the last enemy soldier fell to the rocky ground. The guard stood alone among the bodies of their pursuers, wounded but alive. Blood flowed from cuts on his arms and face, but no injury was serious enough to prevent him from continuing his duties. King Aldrich climbed down to help Marcus back up from the cliff edge. "You led them away from my family," the king said quietly. "Once again you have proven your valor and loyalty beyond question." The ruler's words carried deep respect for the guard who had repeatedly risked everything for their safety. They returned to find Queen Isabella and Prince Adrian waiting anxiously behind the boulder. Dr. Helena immediately began treating Marcus's wounds while he reported on the fate of their pursuers. All immediate threats had been eliminated, but they were now truly alone in the mountains. The abandoned mountain fortress remained a mystery that had to be solved. They could not continue wandering the mountains indefinitely, especially with winter approaching. Marcus volunteered to scout the fortress alone while the others remained hidden, despite his injuries and exhaustion. "I will go with you," Prince Adrian announced firmly. The adults immediately protested that it was too dangerous for the young boy. But Adrian's argument was surprisingly mature. "If the fortress is safe, you will need help preparing it for everyone else. If it is dangerous, one more person might make the difference. Marcus looked at the boy with new respect. The prince had proven himself brave and capable during their ordeals. More importantly, he understood that leadership sometimes required sharing risks rather than avoiding them. The 8-year-old was already showing the qualities he would need as a future king. King Aldrich made the decision reluctantly. You may go with Marcus, but you will follow his orders without question. Your safety remains the highest priority. The king's trust in Marcus was absolute, but sending his only son into potential danger was agonizing. They approached the fortress carefully as evening shadows lengthened across the winter settled over the mountain fortress like a protective blanket. The royal family had survived their first month in exile, but the challenges of leadership in hiding were just beginning. Messages from loyal supporters in the occupied capital painted a grim picture of Drakmore's harsh rule and the people's growing desperation for their rightful king's return. Marcus had become more than a guard during their time in the fortress. He served as military advisor, scout, and trusted confidant to the entire royal family. His bond with Prince Adrian had deepened through shared danger and the boy's combat training, which continued daily in the fortress courtyard despite the cold weather. The prince had grown stronger and more skilled with his sword, but more importantly, he had developed the strategic thinking that would serve him as a future king. During their evening discussions by the fire, Adrian asked probing questions about leadership, justice, and the responsibilities of power that impressed even Master Edmund. Marcus, when I become king, will I have to make decisions that hurt innocent people? The prince asked one snowy evening. The question reflected his understanding that leadership often involved impossible choices. Marcus considered his response carefully, knowing that his words would shape the boy's future approach to ruling. Sometimes protecting innocent people requires actions that seem harsh, Marcus replied. But a good king always looks for solutions that cause the least harm to the most people. Your father faces that challenge now, how to reclaim the kingdom without destroying it in the process. The explanation helped Adrian understand the complexity of their current situation. King Aldrich had been in secret communication with resistance groups throughout Valenhall. Farmers refused to sell grain to Drakmore forces. Merchants sabotaged supply lines. Even some nobles who had initially accepted the occupation were beginning to organize opposition. The kingdom was ready to fight back, but they needed leadership and coordination. The hidden chamber in the fortress had yielded more than gold and documents. Ancient maps showed secret passages and forgotten mountain paths that could move small groups of fighters without detection. These routes would be crucial for coordinating resistance activities and eventually launching a counterattack. Dr. Helena had proven invaluable during their exile. Beyond treating injuries and illnesses, she had used her medical knowledge to develop clever ways of passing messages. Herbs and medicines could carry coded information to resistance contacts, and her reputation allowed her to travel more freely than obvious military personnel. A breakthrough came in early spring when Captain Rodriguez arrived at the fortress. Marcus had assumed his friend died during the mountain pursuit, but Rodriguez had been captured and later escaped during a prisoner transport. His knowledge of enemy positions and weaknesses would be crucial for planning their return. Drakmore forces are spread thin across the kingdom, Rodriguez reported during a council meeting. They never expected such widespread resistance. Their supply lines are vulnerable, and morale is declining among their soldiers. The people are ready for liberation, but they need to see that their king has not abandoned them. The discussion that followed would determine the fate of their kingdom. Some advisors argued for a gradual campaign of sabotage and guerrilla warfare to weaken enemy forces over time. Others pushed for a dramatic strike to recapture the capital and demonstrate royal power. Both approaches carried enormous risks. Marcus proposed a different strategy that surprised everyone. "What if we make ourselves visible again?" he suggested. "Not hiding in the fortress, but moving among the people, organizing resistance directly. The prince's presence would inspire loyalty better than any military victory." The proposal was bold and dangerous. Prince Adrian immediately supported Marcus's idea. "The people need to see that we share their risks," the boy said with wisdom beyond his years. "A king who hides while his subjects suffer loses the right to rule." His words carried the moral authority that would define his future reign. King Aldrich was torn between protecting his family and fulfilling his duties as a ruler. The decision was complicated by intelligence reports that suggested Drakmore was planning to execute prominent nobles who had supported the royal family. Time was running out for peaceful resistance. The plan they eventually developed balanced caution with boldness. The royal family would leave the fortress and establish mobile camps throughout the kingdom. They would coordinate resistance activities while remaining difficult for enemies to locate and attack. It was dangerous, but it offered the best chance of eventual victory. Marcus would lead a small group of elite guards responsible for the prince's safety during this mobile campaign. Their training intensified during the final weeks at the fortress. They practiced rapid camp setups, emergency evacuations, and coordinated combat tactics for protecting the royal family in various scenarios. The night before their departure, Marcus stood watch on the fortress walls and reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. A simple palace guard had become a military leader, strategic advisor, and surrogate father to the future king. The responsibility was enormous, but his resolve remained absolute. Prince Adrian joined him on the wall, unable to sleep before their dangerous mission began. The 9-year-old boy had grown tall over the winter, and his face showed the seriousness that comes from witnessing adult struggles. But his eyes still held the spark of youth and hope for the future. "Are you afraid, Marcus?" the prince asked quietly. The guard considered lying to protect the boy's confidence, but their relationship was built on honesty and mutual respect. Adrian deserved the truth about the dangers they would face together. "Yes, I am afraid," Marcus admitted, "but fear can be useful if it makes us more careful and prepared. The key is not letting fear stop us from doing what is right." His honest answer seemed to comfort the prince more than false bravery would have. They talked through the night about their plans, their hopes, and their commitment to the people of Valenhall. As dawn broke over the mountains, the royal family prepared to leave their sanctuary and return to a kingdom that desperately needed their leadership. The real test of their courage and determination was about to begin. The mobile resistance campaign would last for months, moving from village to village, organizing loyal forces and building momentum for the final push to reclaim the capital. Marcus and Prince Adrian would face dangers that would test every skill they had learned and every bond they had forged. But on that morning, as they rode down from the mountain fortress, they carried with them something more powerful than weapons or gold: the unshakable conviction that protecting innocent people was worth any sacrifice. The guard who had once struck down an assassin to save a child was now ready to help that child reclaim his rightful throne. The kingdom of Valenhall would be free again, and the bond between Marcus and Prince Adrian would become legendary among those who understood that true loyalty is not given to titles or crowns, but to the ideals that make leadership worthy of respect. Their story would inspire future generations of guards and princes who learned that honor is earned through action, not birth. As they disappeared into the forest paths that would carry them back to their people, Marcus knew that whatever trials awaited them, they would face them together. The child he had protected had become a leader worth following, and their partnership would restore justice to their beloved kingdom.